Note to the British Peerage. January 3, 2020 by Anna von Reitz. You all know the observation, if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That is what is happening with all this Iran war talk. Iran hasn't participated in a war outside its borders for over 200 years, about the same amount of time that we've been used as cheap mercenaries by the Pope and the British Crown Corp to rampage around the world and attack other people for profit. So now the big buzz is, will Trump go for a war against Iran? He's being offered a fat contract to do so, and as everyone knows, he's up against it for money to fund the military and the federal civil service. That isn't, by the way, because Americans haven't already paid through the nose for their services. It's because the popes and the British monarchs haven't paid their debts to us for 160 years. Now, the Pope wants a war in Iran because Iran is one of the few remaining nations that is still functioning as a land jurisdiction government. The Pope wants a war with Iran, because they, the Holy Roman Empire elites, are aiming at their cherished goal of complete world domination and corporate feudalism. So it has nothing to do with Iran per se. It has to do with how much economic pressure the rats can put on Trump, to force him to sell American soldiers as cheap mercenaries and make some payola. That's all that is going on here, except that it is diametrically opposed to everything our actual country stands for. And it would cost Trump the election. So, step back, children, and see what you shall see. It's not a nail. And we don't need a hammer. What is really at issue is a debt owed to us by the Pope and the Queen, and all Mr. Trump has to do, is what we have urged him to do from the beginning. Redefine his federal dual citizenship, and he can command all the wealth in the world, as an American. In his current status, he has to take orders from the Queen and the Pope. He has to constantly backtrack against the European power elite because, technically, he is working for them. And by European power elite I mean mainly the rats in Brussels and Rome, though you have a few of your own. Trump can turn that around and get where he wants and needs to go in an instant, simply by reclaiming his American state national identity, and presenting the Pope with a bill for all the goods and services owed to us, the long-lost Americans. Federal citizens can function as dual citizens, all that matters is which two citizenships you choose. Most Americans have been deliberately misidentified as dual federal citizens, a process like rustling and re-branding cattle, that has been going on here without our knowledge for decades via the birth certificate process, and which is entirely illegal, immoral, and unlawful and against all forms of national and international law, including both the Geneva and Hague Conventions. No doubt Donald Trump was rounded up like the rest of us and had the federal citizen stamp affixed to his rump when he was just a few days old. But like the rest of us, he can change that. His birth certificate is evidence of unconscionable contracting. He doesn't have to work for the Pope and the Queen. In fact, as they are operating under our delegated power with respect to us, they need to be working for him. And all he has to do, is stand up and declare that he's a New Yorker, born and bred, and that he adopts New York as his birth state. Not only is it true, it's easy. And then he can do everyone on Earth a great big favor by stopping the misuse of Americans as mercenaries and calling an end to the New World Order, which is what he wants to do, and which we will require him to do. All of a sudden the federal budget crisis and the presumed power of the municipal United States government vanishes like a puff of smoke. Suddenly, instead of operating as paupers and debtors, Mr. Trump can operate in the actual power holder office and have all the money and credit he needs to restore America and the rest of the world, too. By working for the actual American states and people, he can change the entire chessboard, and that, my dears, will be the end of all this warring and waste and lies and everything else that has harmed us and harmed our world. We aren't the debtors. They are. And on top of that, thanks to their misuse and abuse of our armed services, we have the drop on them. So, think peace. Think, wake up, Donald Trump. Wake up, U.S. military. Think, we will hold everyone involved personally and commercially liable and accountable for any war with Iran or any war, period, at all. Their salad days of making money off of war have just come to a screeching halt, though they may not know it yet. And now, a special note to the British Peerage. Apparently, this information is not well known and even very distinguished British peers are unaware of it, but Queen Elizabeth II isn't sitting on the throne of Great Britain and Commonwealth. She abdicated that position 3 days after her coronation and has been sitting on the chair of the estates ever since. That is, she committed regal suicide on paper. Her reign lasted exactly 3 days. Apparently, she was grossly mis-advised to do this by her husband, Prince Philip, and his uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten, who always had more ties to foreign interests, and against the interests of Britain. What this means is that Great Britain has been in the grip of a de facto corporate government in the same way that America has been. The Queen is dead on paper. Can she recoup from this? What help or control can she still exert from her perch on the chair of the estates? What can the British peerage do to save Britain and the Commonwealth, and their national monarchy? Ironically, the man uniquely entrusted and entitled to answer these questions is the Lord High Steward, Lord Talbot, and he is actually also entitled to the throne, and making a bid for it. As it is vacated, Elizabeth II abdicated in effect, and none of her sons seem interested and morally competent to do the job. British peers, if I were you, I would think hard about my Queen and my country, both. Elizabeth II has been betrayed and ill-advised and done her best within her knowledge and capability for many years, so it isn't like you can just throw her under the bus. At the same time, you can't go on like this, living under the thrall of the banks and the EU and the so-called governmental services corporations. You must assert your true national interests and begin operating as an independent land jurisdiction government again, just as we have, or you will be in the same position as the United States has been in, indebted on paper beyond any ability to pay, and being jerked endlessly back and forth by the madmen in control of the central banks and the UN Corporation. People need to stop thinking about and chasing after money. They need to realize that money is just a product like Acme widgets and national currencies are just brand names. What's keeping you from making your own widgets and promoting your own brand name? These and many other questions must naturally arise as we all walk forward together. Speaking for, I am sure, the majority of Americans, despite all the abuse that we have suffered at the hands of the British Crown Corp, we retain our fondness for the people of Great Britain and the actual British Commonwealth. We simply need you to wake up out of your stupor and do what has to be done to help straighten things out. Work with the Americans, not the US, and fully inform your people. Help Elizabeth II make the most of her remaining position and assist Lord Talbot in his duties and efforts. The world is waiting for you, just as it was waiting for us. Help support this work by visiting www.annavonreitz.com and look for the donate button. Links to this article and more can be found in the video description box.
Stay with me for a moment. Here is a simple tool for humanity, proven to preempt colds, flu and relieve seasonal allergy symptoms. It works on cold sores and warts too. Learn how to use it. Watch the intro video at wellnessrods.com for more information. Use coupon code ANNAYouTube to get 10% off and 20% gets donated to help support Anna Von Reitz.